Hey, folks, welcome to WP Roundtable, episode 180. My name is Kyle Maurer, coming to you from Jackson, Michigan. I work for a company called Sandhills Development, and we make WordPress plugins. We make them pretty darn well. And I'm here with a very special guest today. Sally Goetsch is joining me. How are you doing, Sally?
I'm doing pretty well, and glad to be here. Had to dodge some planes to make it here, as my husband was supposed to be arriving about 12:30. His flight got canceled, and he doesn't even know if he's going to be home today. But at least we know that it's safe for me to stay here long enough to have this interview.
Well, that's great. I feel privileged to have gotten this much of your time. So thank you for doing so. All right. Well, we're going to talk about you, Sally, and about your background and the things that you do. Before we do, we're going to jump on our quick picks of the week. Just a part of the show we always include where everybody present shares something that they think is worth sharing that is kind of new. And this can be anything. It could be the latest plugin that you tried out or the tastiest craft beer you just tried and need to tell people about. I recently have been enjoying the 99% Invisible podcast, which is not new. That's not you didn't discover that from me, that's for sure. It's an institution, a serious podcast, one of the greatest of them out there. But they've been recently doing a series called Articles of Interest, which I am just so intrigued by. The show is like one of the greatest podcasts that exists, but their Articles of Interest series has been particularly interesting to me. And they're talking mostly about clothing. Different trends in fashion, different eras, and the roots of some of these different popular articles of clothing. They had a whole episode about pockets, and an episode about blue jeans, and an episode about the apparel in the punk rock movement in the 80s. All of these have been fascinating to me. So I recommend tuning into that show. Sally, what do you have to share today?
Okay. Well, first, Adam Silver insisted that I give him a shout out, so I better do that before I forget it. Wouldn't want to tick Adam off. Secondly, there's an article that I found in one of my numerous feeds somewhere called "Why Big Companies Squander Brilliant Ideas." It's by Tim Harford, the undercover economist, and it talks about some really notable occasions when people were presented with revolutionary ideas and screwed it up, like the invention of the tank, which the British passed up the first tank, and when they accepted the second tank, they had trouble taking real advantage of it. And then they actually succeeded with it, and they still went and invested in getting more horses for the cavalry. And then a much more modern example is that Xerox PARC invented a graphical UI and a mouse, and both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates took that and ran with it, and Xerox never put it into practice. They weren't geared up for that. They weren't in a position where they could shift their mindset enough to take advantage of the idea. And I think, on the one hand, it's encouraging for all of those of us who are small businesses and don't have to try to shift the entire weight of, hundreds or thousands of employees to make a change. And on the other hand, it is sort of like, this explains some of those great blunders of history.
Wow. That sounds like a fascinating read.
Yes, I put the link in your chat so you can add it to your show notes. Or
yeah, I appreciate that.
If one has show notes on YouTube, I'm not.
Yeah.
Ironically, I'm one of those people who will run a mile before breakfast to avoid watching a video. I download YouTube videos and convert them to MP3 files so I can listen to them.
Wow, that's remarkable.
And unusual. I realize that's very strange that many people prefer video to audio, but almost always, if I am at a screen, I'm doing something else, and I don't want to be watching your audio, and so I want to be able to listen to things when I'm driving or when I'm cooking or when I'm doing something where my eyes are occupied but my brain not really that much.
Oh, it's one thing that I love so much about the audio format, because you can multitask. It's wonderful. Video and even text, for that matter, do require your undivided attention for it to deliver anything to you.
I think undivided attention might be blasphemous in 2018.
Yeah, when do you have anyone's undivided attention? I don't even know. Sally, let's talk a little bit about your background now. There could be people tuning into this show who don't know your life story, don't know who you are, don't know what you're about. I want to start a little bit in the distant history, maybe not so distant, but at least at the point where a younger Sally decided that you have a plan for the future, or at least some semblance of a plan, of a vague idea of the direction that you want to go. I want you to describe to us what that vision was and how you took your first steps on that new path.
My first vision as a child was that I wanted to be a writer. And I have done professional writing work in the past, but I wanted to be a writer because I love to read. And people, were sort of trying to talk me out of that because they had an interest in the idea that I might be able to make a living. And I heard a joke from a author who's been widely published and had some bestsellers, that the difference between a full-time writer and a pizza is that a pizza can feed a family of 4. But I never stopped writing. I've written draft versions of a handful of novels, and a long number of years ago now, and attempted to publish them. And then I was going to be a psychologist, and I went to I went to college thinking that, and I got sucked into the classics vortex. I started studying Latin in high school, and I took a few more courses, and then a few more courses, and I was taking psychology courses, and they didn't actually interest me that much. The idea of sort of being paid a lot of money to sit and listen to people's problems appealed to me, but the actual process of learning psychology, not so much. So I became a classicist. It took me a little while to admit I was going to do that, and then I spent the next large number of years studying Greek and Roman history and literature, and I developed a passion for ancient theater and modern performance. And so I went to graduate school with the idea of becoming an academic, and never getting rich, but making enough money to live on, and doing something I really liked, which was great. And at the time, and it was also when I discovered the web. Well, when this is about when the web was being invented. And while I was in graduate school, I started an electronic journal that we were publishing by FTP and Gopher, if you are old enough to remember those things. And somebody showed me the web one day, and it was even on like a grayscale screen, but it totally blew me away. I'm like, I have to have that. And over the course of the next year or so, I got a book. I taught myself HTML. That wasn't too difficult in those days because there wasn't very much of it. And started, and you just wrote all of your code in a text editor, and then you FTP'd it up to your Unix server. It was a laborious process, but it was interesting. And I got into it because I was studying something that you'd think, had nothing at all to do with modern technology.
Wow. What were some of your early applications for this skill?
So what the journal I had started was literally about ancient theater and modern performance, and theatrical productions are visual, and being able to show pictures. I mean, we had sort of listings and reviews and some articles, and so you wanted to be able to put pictures in that, and it was way before you could reasonably imagine putting a video on the web. I mean, a fast modem was like 14.4K. And a T1 line. That was impressive in those days. So, you know, I was interested in it for that, and I was just fascinated about, you know, as a scholar, hyperlinks make a whole lot of sense because you're always, you know, making citations of the people whose work that you talk about or whatever it is you're discussing, and then to be able to have that as a hyperlink and click on it, it's very natural, and it's also very natural to like reach out and connect things and attribute stuff to others. So it made sense to be there, and I built a website for the department I was working in, and then for a couple of other departments. But all this time, while I was in graduate school, I had gotten ill, and I never actually got better. I mean, I got somewhat better, but I never completely recovered, and I had to leave England because my visa had run out, and I had to stop working for a while. Teaching is fabulously rewarding, but also really intense and exhausting. And part-time university teaching doesn't pay very well. And so I spent a couple of years being retired and working on improving my health and getting more support and getting more medication. And, you know, I got enough better to be looking around for work and started just kind of picking up whatever I had skill for, and ended up getting back to web design and various related kinds of consulting. So I was doing some copywriting. I was doing some general purpose, you know, computer troubleshooting, help desk kind of stuff. Now, there's a thankless task. And various sorts of things. And in the course of this, one of my clients suggested I start an email newsletter reminding people to back up their computers. And in fact, I wrote that newsletter, which I converted to a blog in 2005, pretty much every week between 2003 and 2011. That's when I got married. There were a bunch of things that I did not have enough time to do after I got married. But that was one where, you know, it no longer related to what I was really doing for work. So that was a thing to sacrifice versus the stuff that was actually, you know, relevant to what brought me an income. And also a little later in 2005, I discovered WordPress, and it was still fairly primitive at this time, but I'd stumbled onto podcasting and started listening to podcasts. And the podcasters were all using WordPress because not only did it generate a feed, but they had the PodPress plugin to, you know, help you set up the enclosures. And I just kind of got sucked in. And in 2009, I joined a WordPress meetup. And by the end of that year, I'd become the organizer because that's kind of what happens. So there's a rule that my husband says, oh, you come in and take over everything. But, you know, there's a rule I follow, which is if you're new somewhere and you don't feel like you belong, do service. You know, help out. You know, you'll feel much more connected. Well, a lot of places, they have trouble finding people who are willing to help out. And so before too long, you get recruited to do all kinds of stuff. And because I was, you know, I had to be at the meetup every month. I had to find a topic. I maybe had to do the presentation on a topic. And I was with more WordPress people, and I was learning more about WordPress, and I was doing more WordPress work. And it basically just ate my life, you know, in what has proven to be a positive way. And I resisted learning PHP for a long time, and I'm sort of resisting learning JavaScript now. But you know, I've come to where I enjoy writing code. I'm by no means wonderful at it, but I really enjoy doing it, and I especially enjoy finding ways to help my clients, you know, fulfill their missions. You know, do what they're really out there to do.
Wow. Okay. So you were doing this independently for the majority of the time, or all of the time?
For all of the time. I'm unemployable. I still have, I mean, you know, by now I'm temperamentally unemployable, but I'm unemployable because nobody is going to hire someone for a full-time job who might unpredictably suddenly be unable to work for 6 weeks.
I see.
Yeah, it's highly inconvenient, but you know, I can do a lot, but I can't promise that I can do it every day.
Sure. Has that, I would imagine that has impacted experiences with clients now and again. I've had my share of clients who are not very forgiving for me taking time away.
Sometimes, for the most part, actually, they've been fairly good about it. But there have been some cases where either I wasn't able to take something on because the request came in at a time when I was, barely able to look at a computer once a day, never mind do any work on it. And other times when, fortunately the delay wasn't catastrophic, but it was inconvenient. The client wasn't happy about it. And, I don't like not meeting deadlines, but sometimes there's just nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I'm also sure that in that amount of time, you've probably learned a lot of lessons about how to negotiate your arrangements, your client relationships, just how to navigate that. You probably have a lot of valuable lessons that you've learned over that time. Just how to do it right.
Well, it's an evolving process, and still, estimating how long something will take me if nothing goes wrong is still challenging often. But I do always try to assume, okay, I'd better say that this is going to take longer than I think it's going to take first, because it's technology and sometimes you run into stuff that doesn't work the way it's going to be. And sometimes things come up with the client, and sometimes, but also because there will probably be at least a few days in there that I can't work because I'm sick.
Okay. Are there things along the way that you maybe used to do or used to try to do? Could be services you tried to provide, or ways that you would engage a client on certain routines, or certain types of commitments, certain technologies, anything. Are there things that you used to do but for some reason let go of and said, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm cutting this from my business, and no longer offering it or arranging it, because of hard lessons learned?
To a degree. I mean, I would know a lot of stuff a lot better if I had, more energy to spend on learning things. And I also know that, there's barely enough of me to go around as it is. So I'm not going to try to learn, WordPress and Joomla and Drupal or a bunch of other things. And it means I'm, more focused in one area than I might be otherwise, and possibly, less prepared for, whatever the next thing is that comes along. I think WordPress will be here for a good while, but, not forever, because nothing is. And I've also gotten to be more selective about clients, and, more careful to find people who are a good match, because, as nice as it would be to help a lot of the smaller clients, that tends to be where you end up with a lot of extra, spending a lot of extra time. That when you work for people who are more established in business, they have a sense of what business expenses are and what they expect to get out of something, and therefore what it's reasonable to invest in it. And when you're dealing with a very small business, they have no idea like what's involved in the work that you're doing. They often are not very sure what their business goals are, or who their specific audience is, or what they need, or what it wants. And, there end up being a lot of extra requests and a lot of arguments. And I've tried to direct people who really want, what they really want is basically a Yellow Pages ad on the internet, and suggested to them basically that that WordPress is probably not a good idea. If you're going to update your site once a year, and there's 500 words of text on it, and you could regenerate it from memory if you need to, then you might as well go to Wix or to something that's just going to provide you something like that and be simple, and because you aren't likely to be getting enough value out of a website for it to be worth paying for it. Paying what a professional developer would charge you for it.
Sure.
So I've learned to do a lot more asking why. Why do you want such and such?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you need a website now? What's it going to do for your business? Where does most of your business come from? Because I don't want to waste their time, and I don't want to waste my time either if it's just not a good match of a job, or not of a good match of a personality. And if somebody says, and I have clients that I've worked for many years, and they've got kind of a sudden thing that comes up and they need it in 3 days, and I'm not paralyzed, then I'll try to get that done right away. But for the most part, I don't want to take on a project where they're like, and we want this whole thing launched in 3 weeks. Because if I can do that, I will collapse afterwards and be unable to do anything for months. And probably I can't. And so I've built up a network of people through the meetup and through the Genesis Slack channel and the Business of WP Slack channel and various other places, so that if somebody asks for something and I know I'm too busy to do it and I'm going to be involved in, it's not like, oh, I know this will be done next week and I can do it, I'll send them to somebody else.
Wow. Okay. Then I'm curious, if you could describe a little bit of some of your specialties, which I'm sure you've really developed over the years. Like, there's got to be a client that comes in and they start to describe their situation and needs, and you are just like, oh, this is a perfect fit. This is exactly what I need. Describe like that scenario.
It varies a little, but I'm narrowing it down. That most of my best clients are marketing directors in organizations, and they have enough authority to sign off on things without going through too many channels, enough people on their own team to make sure that they can do their part of the work in coming up with the content or whatever, and an appreciation of the reason that you hire a professional is for their expertise. So I don't want to be second guessed and micromanaged to an insane degree. I mean, I understand if you want an explanation for why I think we should do a thing, but it's not helpful to have people, pitching in what their, wife's brother's sister-in-law, did on her Squarespace site, and is that going to work in this? And maybe by chance something similar would be appropriate, but if you don't understand what's involved in building it, please do not tell me, oh, this should only take you an hour. The things that clients think will be easy are often very difficult, and the things that clients think are like a really big deal are sometimes something that, like, there's 2 lines of code or a setting they weren't aware of, or something very straightforward that you can do to take care of it. And people who have a long enough scope of what they're doing that they understand this is going to take a while, and they have enough time in which to complete it. But also that they have, ideas of things that need to work in a certain way. I can make a design look like what you want the design to look like, and I enjoy CSS, but I especially enjoy problem-solving sorts of things. And so I've done a lot of work customizing the events calendar. I've done some work with WooCommerce. In fact, I've done some work integrating the 2 of them, because sometimes you have an event product for which a ticket is not actually appropriate. So played around with some post-to-post connections and redirects and things to set it up so that you had a permanent repository of these products as products in WooCommerce, and they're connected to events in the events calendar, so that when you've scheduled one, it shows up on the calendar. But when you go to look for the details, when you click it, it takes you to the product so that you can go through the registration process. But if you happen to be at a time when when this particular training isn't being offered, you can still find all the information about the training because the product is there. And events disappear when they're over. And we had a situation where it was very tangled up trying to figure out which information was supposed to be where at what time, and this gives us a single place where it's supposed to be there. The Gravity Forms stuff is, these people have been going through a just ridiculously difficult manual process to get information from forms that was submitted into a view display showing the form results on the one hand, and a testimonial post on the other hand, and a list of logos. And there was a whole lot of manual copying and pasting and putting things into tables. And it was just like, no, you do not have to work this hard. You people all have much better things to do with your time. I know there are tools out there that can help, and I'm going to research this and come up with a plan and put it into action and, make your lives better.
Wow. All right. Do you think you see yourself continuing to do consulting like this for a long time, or are there any other things that you have like toyed around with? Maybe I'll explore this other things one of these days.
I can't think of anything else that I've really thought, gosh, that might be interesting to do, or I'd really like to, retire and do that someday. I really enjoy what I'm doing now, and that could change. But right now, this is pretty much what I envision doing, and continuing to refine the way I work, and hoping to be able to just continue to improve what I can offer people.
Do you remain actively involved in your local WordPress community?
Oh yeah, I mean I'm still the meetup organizer, and so that is a social opportunity for I work from home, and my husband works from home, so it gets kind of cave-like in here sometimes, and so the meetup is a good opportunity to get out and talk to people and be involved, which is another one of the big reasons that I'm on the WP Tonic Roundtable podcast almost every week. It always actually kind of surprises me when I meet somebody who listens to it, because I'm there mostly to talk to the other people who are there and have fun. And so it's sort of like, oh, you mean that was actually valuable to you?
Yeah. We didn't mention where you are, actually.
I'm in Oakley, California, which is about halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento in the Sacramento River Delta.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Moved here from the Bay Area after we got married, and it's rural and flat, which is pretty different from the Bay Area, which is hilly and extremely densely populated.
Yeah, very true. Okay. So do you participate in some of the local WordCamps?
I've been a speaker at WordCamp Sacramento every year since they started. They keep accepting my proposals. And I've really enjoyed that. And, we've talked about having a WordCamp in the Bay Area now that WCSF is no more. But I know that would be too much for me to try to do. So I don't know, if we pull off this website weekend project, I might feel more confident about a WordCamp. But there's just more things I'd like to be involved in than there is time or energy to do them.
Yeah, that's really true. What are some of the latest, what's some of the latest tech and tools that you're getting a lot of value from or using these days?
I mostly use Laragon for local development because although it's not slick, it's pretty easy, and it does what I need it to, and it runs pretty efficiently. And I'm getting really excited about Gutenberg, despite not being a JavaScript person, because I think there's going to be quite a lot that you can still do with PHP. There's a new beta of the upcoming version of Advanced Custom Fields Pro with the Gutenberg block support in it where you can basically create blocks out of field groups in ACF, and so I don't know how good I will ever get with the JavaScript end of things, and I'm still like not at that point of, okay, we're going to set up this like wonderfully automated build process. I am progressing in the direction of like real developerhood, but wow. I adopt new CSS very quickly, so I was a huge fan of Flexbox and dragging everybody onto that bandwagon in 2016 and started really getting into CSS Grid last year. And so these are like certain things that people know they can come to me about. I have a lot of tutorials, some of them involving Flexbox and Grid on my website, and have a lot of tutorials about the events calendar on my website. And I get tons of people getting in touch with me because the Modern Tribe folks send them there. Oh, you have a question about this? Here, try that over there. Look over here. And then I get people asking questions, which I try to answer. And I sometimes get people who are like, no, I don't want to try to figure this out. I just want to pay you to do it. And I've learned that I have to be really careful with that, because they say, oh, I'm having a problem with this thing in the events calendar. And it turns out the problem is not with the events calendar. The problem is with something else that has a conflict with it. So, the solution is not what I thought the solution would be. And, one of the hard lessons is like, do not quote before you review the code. It's like, undertake some paid discovery, do an actual code review, make some recommendations, and then they can either say, yes, we'd like to hire you to deal with these things, or no, I think we'll look somewhere else. But, there are so many hidden gotchas in sites, both, the sort of DIY sites that people have put together and had no idea about, what best practices might be, and they have, a theme with 58 plugins built into it, and half of them are out of date, and, the other half conflict with each other, and, there's stuff is in a mess, or, you've got a code base that's been worked on by a lot of different people over time, and there's some stuff in there that may have been a great idea at the time it was written, but you look at it now and it's like, WTF? Like, what were they thinking? And you know that it's going to break before too long. You're going to have to, pull that out and redo it.
Wow. Are you using Gutenberg on any active projects right now?
I've been testing it in stuff that I'm working on building, and I have a Gutenberg test site that we put up in 2017 for a contributor day for people to play with. So I go back and forth and play with it. I have not put it into action on an active production site yet, but that's coming very soon. I mean, it's theoretically coming very soon to all of us, although I think aiming for November 19th is suicidal.
Whoa.
I mean, I don't suppose it will be that disastrous. It just seems like, that it can't possibly really be ready by then, and that there isn't a compelling reason, to release it in November rather than January. And that it's taken this long. If we need, another couple of months to deal with, say, the accessibility issues, we should take the time and make sure it works, because we have heard all along it will be released when it's ready. And it seems that although it's getting closer and it's great, and I like it, for a lot of stuff, I like using Gutenberg block templates better than I like using Beaver Builder, although right now the use case is much more limited. But I think they should wait for the merge until until they know that it's going to be usable for the largest number of users.
Okay. Well, that's That's an interesting and not that uncommon of a take on the topic, I think. But that is a project that's been in the works for quite a long time, and now we're getting to that weird point where it's just about here. Do you think you anticipate any challenges among your client base onboarding to this or transitioning to this? Like, are you telling clients about it, or do you think there will be extra work?
I've been telling clients, I'm sure there will be extra work here and there. I mean, there's not likely to be a terrible conflict on any of the sites that I'm working on, but there will be some adjustments. There will be some editor styles. There will be some, probably adaptations of things that I've, created as shortcodes and need to convert into blocks. And there will certainly be education for the clients. I mean, some of my clients almost never touch their own websites. So it's really their assistant that I'm going to need to do the educating with, or, if they ask me to do stuff, although I mostly don't like to do content updates so much, then, clearly it would hardly matter to them what's running the back end. They never know the difference. But in many cases, they at least occasionally log into their own website to do something, and they need to know that, it's going to be different. And I think for the most part, it will be a good experience for my clients. But, I do have some work to do to prepare some of the stuff. And it is, I doubt that I will be ready with that by the 19th of November. So, I'm likely to have to put the classic editor plugin on some of those sites, even if it would otherwise be, work pretty well. But I am looking forward to being able to, set stuff up in a way that just makes more sense than some of the workarounds that we've had so far. I love advanced custom fields, but a lot of that stuff technically shouldn't be post meta.
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I wonder if you had strong influence or were even in charge. We know that Matt is going to be talking about phases 2 and 3 and beyond of the Gutenberg project at the State of the Word. He'd said this. If you were in charge, what do you think some of the focuses would be in those phases and those that followed for the WordPress project?
Right. Well, from what I've heard of the next phases, which is basically to expand sort of Gutenberg into the customizer and eventually create an entire site building experience that works this way. It makes sense as where to go. I'm sure we'll run into various bumps along the way because it's inevitable. But I don't, nothing I've heard makes me think, oh, you shouldn't do it that way. You should do, this first and then that, or you should really concentrate on these things. And I'm sure as I hear more discussion from people who are involved in it and who understand better than I do, the way the underlying technology of it works, I will start to have opinions. I'm good at having opinions. I try not to express too many opinions in the absence of actual experience.
What if you didn't have to think about the rest of the world? What if you had to think only about your scope of influence, your client base, and maybe the members of your local meetup? What change could you make or area could you improve that would have the greatest impact just on that group?
I think one thing that would help a lot is we seriously need to overhaul widgets. Widgets are one of those things that, was fairly clever at the time they were created, but they've become very clunky to manage. And, I can see that this is moving in the direction of blocks, and that it's just going to be easier for people if they can look at their page and say, oh, okay, over here is this widget, and I'm not sure I like this widget, and I can just click this widget and I can rearrange it, or I can replace it with a different one. Because, clients mostly expect the inside and the outside of their website to work the same way. And so, I work with Genesis, and for many years they've done these, widgetized homepages, which I have stopped using and started creating, homepage templates with a page builder or with ACF because it is too hard for the client when they want to change something on the home page and they go to the home page and there's nothing there, because what they really have to do is, edit widgets or write this, or, in some cases, not generally the way I build things, but they go to the home page and there's this mess of shortcodes and they have no idea what it means, and if nothing else, Gutenberg is going to expand all the shortcodes so that you can see what's supposed to be there. I don't think shortcodes are going to disappear overnight, but again, they're kind of a kludge for not being able to add dynamic content to the editor in a way that's safe, because you don't want people just dropping, script into the text editor.
Right.
That's a big security problem. But the whole business of iframes and embeds and things that get messed up if you switch between the text editor and the visual editor, and all of that stuff is going to start to go away. So I think as we move toward something that may not entirely be a front end editing experience, I don't get a sense that it's precisely going there, but where you are dealing with something that's a lot closer to what you would expect to be dealing with from looking at the website, where things are in a more logical place. And, I don't want to lose the fact that as a content management system, you have, you centralize where you put stuff, right? You have certain kinds of content and it's here. And when you need to change it, you change it there. And then you can display it anywhere on your site. And people who, use technology at a certain level, people who use Microsoft Word and are not like professionals at setting up Microsoft Word docs to take advantage of all of Word's features, like, oh, well, if I wanted to have this particular blurb here, I just have to like type it or paste it onto that page. And people who work like that expect to work like that on the web, and that's very inefficient. And if you ever need to change those things, it's like, wait, no, we had to do this in the early HTML days, right? You needed to add a menu item. You had to like go through every single page and edit the menu with the new link. This is one of the things that endeared me to WordPress, was like, even before they had the drag and drop menus in 3.0, if you added a new page, it would magically appear on the menu everywhere.
Right.
We want to save ourselves unnecessary labor, and that's something that I think, you just have to educate clients about. But I also think that, anything that's going to make it an easier experience for them to work with their websites is going to be good.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Thank you for all that insight. We're getting close to our time. I'm going to ask you a few kind of wrap up questions, Sally, and let you get back to your day. What's on your schedule? Calendar for the rest of 2018? Where might people bump into you in person?
You will most likely bump into me at the East Bay WordPress meetup if you want to come. It's the third Sunday of the month at 1 p.m. in Oakland. You can go to meetup.com and check that out. You can usually find me on the WP Botanic Roundtable podcast at 8:30 in the morning Pacific time on Fridays. And it's, it is meant to be a public thing. If you ever want to get up at the crack of dawn and, join in and heckle us, or if you'd like to be a participant, just let me know or let Jonathan Denwood know. You can find me on Twitter a fair amount of the time. And I am at Sally Goetsch on Twitter. And if you can spell my name, you can find me any place, because there's only one of me in Google. And my parents did not realize they were blessing me with a name that would be very search friendly.
That's great. Do you, Sally, have good suggestions for people that I should have on this show as guests in the future?
I would recommend that you talk to Anka Moshoyu, who is the head of Tech Liminal, a technology salon here, and With TechLiminal is where we hold the meetup, which is how I met Anka. She does WordPress development. She's done a bunch of database specialties. She runs a WordPress support group and some maker things, and is just really terrific at community involvement, and generally an interesting person.
Wow. Okay. Great suggestion. That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Sally. And you mentioned already, fortunately, where people can find you online. So thank you for that. Is there anything final that you'd like to share? Any call to action for anybody tuning in?
Any call to action for anybody tuning in? I would say go out and test Gutenberg. But if you have a local meetup and you haven't been involved in it, go.
Right on. That's perfect. And I echo that same sentiment. Getting engaged with my local WordPress meetup right when it got started changed the trajectory of my career and my business, and has been hugely impactful for me personally and professionally. And I remain heavily involved today and will for the foreseeable future. So thanks for the mention of the meetup. And thank you, Sally, for taking the time out of your day to come talk with me and share your story.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right.